Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Dan. I'm working on the sequel to the Urquan Masters, Free Stars, Children of Infinity, and I'm one of the halves of Pistol Shrimp, and joined by a special guest. But before we get to the special guest, Fred.
I'm Fred. I'm half of the original Urquan Masters team with Paul Ritchie, and I'm working on the sequel as well with Dan and many volunteers.
Hi, Mac.
And over to me. Oh, right. Yeah, Mac Walters. I am the head of Worlds Untold, studio head of Worlds Untold. Been around the industry for about 20 years now, doing this and that and the other thing. But up until recently, all of that was at BioWare, primarily on people would probably know me from the Mass Effect franchise.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining. I'm just gonna get the easiest question, at least for us, out of the way, which
Yeah.
is, um, you know about a game called the Urquan Masters. I'm
Yes.
curious. I'm curious how did you experience that? How did you discover it? What
Yeah.
was your story with it?
I figured you would ask me this, so I was trying to rack my brain out because it came at kind of I would say like a dark and tumultuous time, and so it was pre me joining the industry, right? And so I was a kid who was big into building my own game systems, and it was very PC based. I was not console person at all, right? And I had just gone through what I thought was this great sort of. I'd been working in IT, doing a lot of consulting and all the stuff, and I suddenly got this opportunity to be basically a PM for a software development company, and everything was looking rosy. It was looking really fantastic. And it was based out of, I was in Canada, and it was this company was based out of the US. And then they just let us all go. And not only did they let us all go, it was one of those, no vacation, no nothing. It was a bit of the dot-com bubble, and we're kind of going through a bit of a bursting of bubbles right now, right? And I was also at the time like taking an extra post-secondary education, MBA, that they said they'd pay for, which I was then on the hook for. So when I talk about a dark time, it was a dark time, but it was also at sort of the turning point because it was one of those things where everything kind of went south and I had to kind of figure things out. And I went back to what I knew, which was a lot of my entrepreneurial spirit and starting my own company. And I think I remember, tinkering, playing, and experiencing, I think, Urquan Masters through that because, I was just, I had time, let's just say. I had some time on my hands. And, because it was like early 2000s, right? I think we're talking. And then I remember at that point, this is a kind of a side story, but get used to it. That's the way this interview might roll. But I had the great opportunity to just be at an entrepreneurial conference and I met Ray Muzica, right, from BioWare. And here was this person who was kind of debunking one of the myths that I kind of grew up believing, which was video games are fun, but you're not going to make any money at it. It's not a real job. It's not something that you can expect to do as a living. And he was there talking about, how him and Greg had their MBAs and the business plans. He was there to talk about, a lot of the business plans that they were working on and how they were building the business with BioWare. And it was at this sort of moment in time where, I decided I was going to make this big change. So it was a bit of a period of upheaval for me. And yeah, sorry, that was a rambly story of where and how that that
Uh,
encountered sort of thing. But it was interesting because it would have been in a period right before, right when I was still a fan and purely a fan. Had no idea that one day I would be a developer, right? Uh, does that make sense? And then a year later, I'm working at BioWare.
I'm curious. That was basically 10 years after Urquan Masters released. And
Yeah.
how did they introduce it to you, or did you find it by yourself? Did you find the open
No, I
source?
think I found it online. I'm trying to remember how I discovered it. I had a small community of friends, and we 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 would share, different games that we were playing, stuff like that. But it was, when I say small, I mean really small. There was only like two of us. I don't know why. I lived in a very small city, like 100,000 people, and outside of myself building PCs when I was in university and stuff like that, I didn't know a lot of people who were into gaming, to be perfectly honest. And so a lot of the things I had to discover kind of on my own, right? Like that's what I'm saying. It was a period before I was really sort of doing this full time and really had an understanding of what was out there. So it's just a lot of exploring and finding things that, like, I remember, I'm trying to think, like original BBS days, downloading stuff off of that, right? Like, I still, I'm sure like you remember the sounds of a modem,
Oh yeah.
right? But yeah, I can't remember. I'll be honest, I don't remember. I don't remember how I found it. So we'll leave it at that. But yeah.
Well, it's okay if you don't know how you found it, or you're just, this is a long story to cover up. I pirated it. That's okay.
Right.
We've heard it all, and we forgive you. But no, no, seriously. So did you, when you started at BioWare,
Mm.
were you like acquainted with the Archon Masters at that point? Like, was it living in your brain? Had you had memories of it, experiences it, or was it part of like, okay, now I'm working at BioWare and I'm experiencing this game?
Everything you experience, I think, stays with you, right?
I hope. Or some
Yeah,
of the things
well,
I don't want to stay
well,
with me.
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's fair. But no, I think, I, all the way back to, I'm trying to think what were some of my earliest experiences that really, like Zork and text adventures and going all the way back. Like that stuff stays with you, and certainly informs, things that you want to achieve. But I think I'll be honest, one of the reasons that I was excited to join the industry, but then also has kept me in the industry is because it's ever evolving, right? Like, so you remember all the things fondly. It's like, but now what can we do with that? Like, look at the space now. What are the new opportunities? Clearly, if I was building, PCs and stuff like that, I wouldn't say I'm a tech head, but I definitely was always excited about the future and what we would discover in the future, right? So for me, it's always been a very forward looking sort of adventure for me. I don't spend a lot of time looking back. A lot of people, like, one of my least favorite questions, in case you were going to ask it, is, well, what's your favorite movie or what's your favorite TV show? Because honestly, it changes every year. I'm not one of those people who has a diehard thing where I live with it. It's like, recently this is what I love, but I bet in 2 years time that's going to change, sort of thing, because I'm kind of always looking for the next thing, right? And that doesn't mean that things aren't super memorable or impactful to me, but I also want to take that and then go and take that and go. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate that spirit, and it's actually highly relevant to what we're doing, which is we're effectively continuing a 30-year-old story.
Right. Yeah.
So, you want to talk about having to split, I don't want to say split the difference, but
Yeah.
ask yourself the question of what was in the past and what's in the future and how do we tie
Mm.
these together? I'm actually
Mm.
like legitimately curious some of your experience. I am going to ask some of your experience about like, okay, just take a long running franchise like Mass Effect
Yeah.
and what, what was it like? Well, I have a very specific question, but especially because you're working on the writing angle, like, how do you feel writing when you don't know where the end is, right? And there's a
Mm.
mystery that's unsolved, and you
Mm.
love that, and you want to love that. What's your or do you love that? I guess I shouldn't be
Yeah.
presumptuous, but what's
Yeah.
your relationship with like an unfinished plot thread or an unfinished story? And then the flip side, just to overload the question, is time has passed. Let's just say Andromeda, right? There's
Yep.
been years have passed.
Yep.
What's your relationship with that mystery? How do you
Mm.
sort through the bucket of, okay, here's what I'm carrying from my past into
Yeah.
the present and the future?
Right.
What's your process? What was your process for that? And maybe it's different now than it was when you were doing Mass Effect. I'm just very curious.
Yeah. That's a great question, and a unique question. So I think on the first part, I am, as a writer, at least when I was doing more writing, but I still, I'm heavily involved in certainly the high level story at Worlds Untold, if not a day-to-day writer. Um, I love a mystery, and I think it drives a lot of people I work with crazy because ambiguity isn't necessarily fun for people, right? But so when it comes to the story, I like to have an idea of where I'm going. Like, I don't just drive blithely into the darkness and say, well, we'll end up somewhere. I like to have a bullet point, let's call it, for where we're going to end up. But even that bullet point tends to be somewhat open-ended in some ways, right? And I love the process of sort of discovering a story as it evolves. And I think, again, when I talk about one of the things I love about the industry is it's not just me in a room writing things. When I say a story evolves, it's me talking to other designers, artists, whoever, them sort of mirroring things back to me that then inspire me, or even change my perspective completely on what I was trying to do, because I'm like, that's a better idea. I love that idea. Why aren't we doing that? And then it evolves from there. So it's actually that process of not knowing and then going out and kind of, it's almost it's like archival. It's like you're going out in the world to find this story and make it come out. I do like to sort of logically put things together once we have it all. I'm a puzzle person, so I bring all the pieces together, but I don't start there. That's where I end up, right? So that's sort of, maybe that, I don't know if that answers sort of your first question on that process. And then as far as how do you move forward knowing everything that you know, I tend to I'm one of those people, I think I learn a lot more from, call it, the mistakes or the things that didn't work. Maybe we all are, right? I don't know. But so for my forward thinking, when I do it, I don't so much look back on, oh, this was awesome, I want to redo that again. It's more like, man, that didn't work. How do we do that better? Or how could we tell a story like that better? Or how could we do it differently? Or how could we? So it's more about finding the gaps that existed in the past, and then how do we go forward from there and make something even better, or just different, right? Yeah.
Personally, whenever I've participated in making something, that all I see are the mistakes. I don't see the good parts.
Oh yeah.
But
Everyone, one of the questions, I don't know if you get this, is like, do you play the games afterwards? And it's like, until Legendary Edition, when I was working on that, which was a remaster, never play the games once they ship. I just can't, because, well, one, you've probably played them dozens, if not hundreds of times leading up to launch, right? Just as you're testing and playing everything. But to your point, if all you see are the mistakes. It's very hard to see through anything else, right? Like you're just like, oh, I wish we had fixed that. Oh, why
yeah,
that, right?
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. Yeah. And you also have the complete knowledge of what got cut or what got changed
Oh
and
yeah,
what other choices you could have made. And it's
yeah,
very hard to see things with clear eyes.
totally.
For me, I'm curious if you experience this too, but for me, uh, I I was only able to, I mean, I would play the games. I would think they were good and it was
Yeah,
cool, but I would very quickly forget about them because I was thinking about the next project. And it's, I'm the same way, very forward. What's next? What's next? What's next?
yeah.
Um, when we did Skylanders, that was the first time I really got to play my game and appreciate it
Mm,
because it
mm,
was cooperative. So I
yeah,
could sit with someone who'd never played and kind of vicariously, go
yeah,
through, oh, they're having this experience for the first time. What are they reacting to? And not
yeah,
in a playtest setting, which is kind of
no,
different,
yeah,
but being able to sit down with someone and you have even better than perfect knowledge. I would say even worse than perfect knowledge because you know all of the problems and that's all you see. They
yeah,
don't react to that at all. They're just seeing things for the first time and they don't know what they're really missing, Whereas
yeah,
for us, it's like, unfortunately, we know everything we miss and we see it like with laser eyes because we're sort of training ourselves to find those gaps because we want to fill them in and we want to
yeah,
make them better.
yeah, yeah. I have a question back at you. Like, one of the things that I've um tried to at least be aware of, I guess I was going to say battle against, but be aware of, is that, one of the problems is, as a game developer, the longer you're in the industry, the further ahead you start to see where the problems might be. Do you know what I mean? Like, when you're
Yeah.
fresh, young, you're just like, whatever, anything's possible. I think this I heard you at the beginning of this conversation talk about every feature should exist, right?
Yeah.
Um, that's a great youthful sort of interpretation of things when you come in. It's like, yeah, let's do it all, right? Like, it's anything's possible, right? But I think it's important to temper that, because obviously everything isn't impossible, but you don't want to go too far the other way. So do you catch yourselves like kind of killing ideas before they can move forward because um it's going to be painful, or how do you battle against that, I guess?
well, I think some of it is, well, there's just this giant decision tree at the beginning, and
Right,
all branches lead to something.
right,
And I think early in the project, the pruning shears are not brought out. But as you sort of start migrating down some of those paths, and then production sets in, you start to have to get a little more ruthless with which branches of the decision tree you prune.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a really tricky one. I guess I have I'll I guess have a few different parts of a relationship with that question. So one, of course, is just, it's kind of like, look, it is our duty. I mean, I'm not old, but I am. What is old? I don't even know. But I'm older than I was 20 years ago. I can say that
Right.
much. And 20 years ago, I would have had very different attitudes about all kinds of different things. And part of our responsibility, I think, as uh, people with experience, is to help foster sort of not wisdom, but being able to discover things in people who don't know as much. And we have lived that experience, and we know, like, yeah, you could try that, but it's going to be painful and it's going to be hard. And it's sort of, I think I
Right.
related this to someone else recently. Like, if you're ever a kid, especially a kid, especially teenager, rebellious. I was 14, and adults say, well, you'll understand when you're older. And you're like, no, I won't. I refuse to believe in what you're telling me. I'm going to find my own way. Rage against the
Right.
machine. And then you grow up, and then you turn 30 or whatever. And you're like, oh, now I know what they're talking about. But I
Right.
had to experience it for myself. There are
Yeah.
some things
Yeah.
where no amount of conversing or whatever will make anybody believe it. You just have to live the experience. And so, to your question, I think, like, a factor of, I mean, battle is kind of the right word, but weighing the options of
Mm.
saying,
Mm.
hey, I don't want to kill things before they get off the ground and get good. It's much more, there's sort of two brains. There's the brain of pragmatism and saying, okay, right now at this time, like what Fred was saying, like, we're in production. If we do this, my sort of wisdom that I think I have tells me this is going to be an easy win. And I know how we can at least connect the dots, right?
Yep.
Where I struggle, I think personally, is when I see someone has especially a new person, right? Because they're I love working with people who don't have experience because they don't know what they don't know.
Yep.
And they're going to have these out there ideas, just like
Mm.
kids, just like outside of games too. Young
Yep.
generations always have these things that seem crazy, and then you don't know what they're doing, but it's new and they're excited about it and they have energy, and that's sort of the qualities they bring. So what I guess the middle ground for me that I find myself in is, okay, I have all this pragmatic experience. I don't want to stop this thing from getting off the ground because it's going to be cool if you can make it all the way up here. But if I see that your thing has 20 steps involved and you think it's one step, then I feel the responsibility to step in and say, hey, I could see how this could be really neat, but it also has all of these crazy steps that you don't see, and it has these knock-on effects and impacts.
Right.
And for me, the sort of voice of wisdom isn't to kill something because it's going to be a bunch of work. It's to identify to the person doing the work, do you know how many steps that this involves?
Right.
Because I don't want you to sign up for something. And I've had
Right.
my own burnout experience and things like don't kill yourself is kind of my main piece of advice. But if someone's enthusiastic, hey, go for it. But I've
Yep.
been burned out too. And again, that's like the parents talking to the younglings saying, I don't believe you, I'm going to work super hard. I'm like, you're going to regret it in 6 months, but okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I find myself
Yeah.
these days.
Cool. Cool. Oh, thanks for
I
answering
mean, I'm
that.
curious what you're like, honestly, I'm curious what your relationship with that is too, because you've been doing this a while, and it's like, how do you temper that on both sides?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think like you, I like to surround myself with a balance of people, right? I want to be surrounded with people who, who've been there, who've done it, but also that very youthful enthusiasm, even if not youthful in the industry sense, sort of thing, like they're new to the industry. Um, because I try to be open to being inspired by everyone's thing. But I think my approach and how I've tried to, I guess, temper my own sensibility is to convert any of the concerns, like the sort of like, oh, I've been here before, to questions, right? Um, so they go, oh, have you thought about this? In it just as gentle, nice way as I can, not in a judgmental way, so that to your point, maybe they connect the dots on their own, right? And just offering things up as questions and saying, okay, well, what about this? And what about that? And then eventually we get to a point where they're like, yep, I know all that. I want to do it anyway. Great. Or maybe we go, oh yeah, that is going to be more challenging than we thought. Maybe we should investigate a little bit further. And it's also, I'm trying to think, yeah, I think it's been a valuable process too, because I will say at least every so often you start going, have you thought about this? How thought about this? And you realize, oh, they have thought about it, and they were already 3 steps ahead of me. And I thought I knew what I was talking about, but they're already out there. And it's like, whoa, fantastic, right? Like that happens too, which is also, a delightful surprise when it does.
I think also if you can structure the way people works so that they can work as independently as possible. Then if
Mm,
somebody has a harebrained idea, you can say, well, show me.
yeah,
Get other people excited about your harebrained idea without actually dragging them into the
yeah,
process. And
yeah,
then you might build some momentum around that idea that you didn't expect, but the person showed you.
yeah,
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. I like that. I like that too.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up your process, which I find is very like I don't know, maybe Fred and I feel the same way, which is you might have an interesting idea, but any idea you have is only going to get better when I call it ping pong, when you
Yeah,
drop it and then
yeah.
other people bat it around,
Oh
and then
yeah.
either it gets momentum and it's like this is way better than whatever anybody, not just me, anybody had in their
Yep.
head because now you're inspired by someone else's thing, and it can, I'll just, say flat out, inspiration can come from anywhere.
Anywhere.
It can come
Totally.
from a conversation at work. It can come from me riding the bus. It can
Yep.
come while I'm taking a shower, whatever. But the best things always have this like, the team is such an asset for
Yep.
that sort of element.
Yep.
And sort of back to some of your question of like using wisdom and helping people, and the harebrained idea, quote unquote, is like, okay, well, this thing can exist, and if it can excite people and get that momentum, especially when different disciplines are involved, then okay, it probably has potential. Because if the designer is excited and the artist is excited and the writer's excited and they're all excited together, then they're going to be excited to work together on it. And in some ways it's almost, I mean, yes, there is the like, I remember whatever 20 years ago when I would pull all-nighters and just try to get stuff done and crunch and whatever. And I never want to do that again, right?
Right.
There's that thing, which is like, okay, when I was younger, I was literally younger and my body could put up with more.
Right.
Um, but it's also like, I guess working with teams, I've seen, I don't want to call it wisdom. That sounds so high-minded, but my observation is the better the team can see the same thing, the better the result is going to be. Even if it's
Mm.
not even the most inspirational, brilliant idea in the world, if everybody understands it and
Yep.
sees how it's cool, like you take a very basic feature in a game that lots of games have used, crafting, whatever, just
Right.
make something, take anything. If everybody understands it and sees, oh, here's how I can do my work and make it cool and
Yep.
gets excited about
Mm.
it, then it's going to work better. So in some ways, it's not even like the best idea. It's what's the
Mm.
idea that the team understands how they can collaborate on and excite each other about. If
Yep.
everybody's just kind of thinking I'm going to go off this way and I'm going to go off that way, and they're just
Yep.
kind of doing their own thing but not trying to, like to Fred's point, like bring everybody in along with them and say, hey, part of your job is to convince us that going this way is
Mm.
the right thing to do. Then it gets more challenging.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I used to do kind of a somewhat regular presentation. Usually it was students, but sometimes different places. And I called it the myths of game design, right? As such that I knew them at the time. It'd be fun to go revisit it now. But one of the first ones that I could always just see, like the faces in the room kind of just got sad as I explained it, was I said, the myth of the great idea. I get approached at cons or at these places and everyone's like, I got a great idea for a game. Right. And my answer to that is that's really cool. I work with people who give me dozens of great ideas every day. And all of those ideas can't go into the game, but also they're all going to work together to make something even better than the original idea. Even the best ideas don't stay static. They evolve over time. Like, and to your point, a great idea can come from anywhere. It can come from anyone as well. That's another big thing, which is we to avoid siloing and all that other stuff that can happen in big teams, right? Like it's like we have to be open to ideas coming from anywhere and from anyone. Like like you're sharing this game with someone who's not even on the project, but just maybe supporting the studio in a different way, and they just say something and it inspires you or it gives you an idea. And if you're not open to that, you're going to miss a lot of opportunities, in my opinion, sort of thing, right? So really trying to, and it's something that we talk about, sort of, I guess one of our values at Worlds Untold, we talk about creating collaboratively. It sounds obvious, but really at the heart of it, what it means is we are only going to sort of if you can win at this game of game development, you're only going to win together, right? There's not one person here who's going to drag us across the finish line. It's not one idea that's going to drag it. It's all of us together, ping ponging, as you say, working together, sharing our ideas, being open to, I had a great idea, I really loved it, but you know what, you've made it better or you've changed it in a way, and that's improved it, and I'm okay with that. Let's go in that direction.
Pretty sure sales guys don't have good ideas, though. Just saying.
Hey, my dad was in the merchant marine. What's wrong with people sailing? But never mind. That's the beginning of a bad joke I couldn't finish. I mean, you want to talk about easier said than done. Just what you brought up. I mean, that's like almost a full-time job. I say this very lovingly, being in
Right.
that position right now and in other sort of settings. How it's almost like it's your question extended when you're balancing. I mean, something I've just said, at least internally in my head, and have been told to me or coached by someone to say, you should try saying this to the team.
Mm.
But I'm just like, yeah, I have a different way of saying those words personally,
Mm.
but we don't need more ideas right now.
Right.
Something like that. We need to get what we have working. We need to
Yes.
take this
Yeah.
further along because the ideas are the 20-step out ideas, and we need the next step ideas, especially like when you're working with teams of different sizes. The moment you
Yeah.
have a team of two people, the moment you have any sort of communication, there's sort of alignment building and like
Yeah.
getting people, oh, here's the vision, here's how we progress this, here's how we move together. Like you said,
Yeah.
it's not one thing, it's not one person that's going to take it across. It's we all have our parts to play. And the metaphor I use is like we're a sport. I try to keep sports metaphors away from work, but they just are infectious. It's
Right.
like we're a basketball team. Yes, the ball is going into the basket and one person put the ball in the basket, but you know what? There's a whole team that got the ball into their hand and
Right.
let them put the basket. So even though it might look that way, the point is we need the whole team passing the ball and knowing, okay, my
Mm.
position is to pass the ball because they're the best shooter or whatever.
Right.
I don't even watch basketball, and here I am. But like my honest question for you is like, what if like it sounds very big, but like, what have you learned, or how do you find ways to kind of get everyone aligned and on the same page about,
Mm.
hey, not just we're not taking new ideas, which sounds mean and cruel and like
Yeah.
like not soul crushing, dream crushing, like,
Right.
hey, your ideas are great, but you know what? We're never going to be able to do them right now. That just sounds mean, but
Yeah.
or maybe just mean coming from me. But yeah, how do you like talk to your teams about that and say, hey, we need to go here and
Yeah.
we need to work together to get here. And it's very important that we get here. And this can be past experience, current experience, whatever,
Yeah.
not unnamed experience.
Yeah, you're right. It's a really big question. But I think what I would say, I'm kind of moving to my I forget which side of the brain it is, right side, the production side of my head. One of the biggest things I've learned is that people want and crave context for what they're doing currently. And inherently, for whatever reason, in a lot of cases, we underrepresent that context, or we don't do enough. Like there's no world in which you could over communicate that. So we should just over communicate that. So what I mean by that is, you talked about Fred, you talked about like early on, no pruning, later on, you got to prune, right? People need to know that they know what state they're in. It's like we're in the no pruning stage. Every idea is a good idea. And at the end of this is at the end of this current milestone, or whatever you want to call it, this period of production. This is what we're trying to achieve. These are the goals that we want to achieve. And then the real challenge, I think, is what you're getting at is now we're going to shift gears, right? We'll deal with some change management here. So now we have to change the sort of expectation. So everyone understands the context within which they're working and the goal with which they're working towards. And I think it's a really boring answer, but it's just communicating it over and over and over again. So they really understand what you're trying to achieve in the short term, right? Because everybody wants to make something great. That's just a given. That's why you're here. Everybody wants to make something, really cool and awesome. Great. We're all here for that. But within the context of what we're trying to achieve in this next period, what does that look like, right? What does good look like? Which I think is the question that comes up. What does good look like right now? So, for example, right now we're kind of in a prototyping phase, which means you do things fast, you do things dirty, and you move on, right? Like we're not trying to make these things presentable. We're not trying to make these things even playable. It's just something you can prove out, you show it, move on, go, right? And it seems straightforward, but we communicate that pretty much every 2 week sprint that that's what we're trying to do because it's just you just keep saying it, you keep saying it, and it'll be quite frankly honest, it'll be interesting to see as we shift out of that into our next phase how the team adjusts to the new phase. And again, I think it's probably just talking about it, setting the context. Okay, we achieved this. This is what the end goal looks like for this next milestone. To do that, good looks like this in the next period, right? Inherently, I think the other thing that is challenging is helping everyone understand where their piece, when we talked about that create collaboratively, where their piece is going to fit into the greater whole, right? Because we all, like I said, we all want to do things awesome, and we also all feel pressure to do something great, right? So how do you feel comfortable letting something go before it's great? And honestly, I don't have an answer for that. Again, I think it's just working with people in small groups and talking to them and saying, look, this is going to get better. You just have to trust the process to some degree because we have to, if you're a writer, let's just say, it's nothing if we don't get it recorded, if we don't attach it to a character who can animate and perform everything, and then we have cinematics take it, and then eventually it's going to get localized. Like without all that, it's nothing. So it doesn't matter how great it is now. You just need to get it to a point where other people can now add what they've got to it, and there'll be opportunity to improve it as it goes. Um, I guess some of that's probably if I think about it, some of it's in the hiring. It's in the values that we have at the studio, and it's sort of instilling those as you go through. But yeah, it's a I would say it's not a one and done. It's something that you just have to be in and aware of as a leader all the time.
Yeah, I go ahead, Fred.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of what you described, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, um, comes from having a cohesive team kind of all the way through so that
Yep.
they're with you every step of the way. But
Yeah.
like we have volunteers diving in and out,
Mm.
and they're when they dive in, they're starting at the top of the decision tree where you've already pruned
Right.
a way to this path, and somehow you have to drag them down to that path
Right.
before they can be useful in at least in terms of ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the
Mm.
this just to riff off of what Fred was saying too. One of the things we're doing a lot of I'll just say, I mean, there are, so I can own this, crazy things for this project, and at least novel to us, which is, Fred's been independent before. I haven't been independent. I stopped working in games. I did other work. I came back. So, you can never get out. But it's because kind of what you're talking about, games are just too interesting
Mm.
from a future focus point of view of like
Mm.
limitations of technology combined with art. Oh my gosh, it all gets so interesting. So anyway, without going off on my own version of a tangent
Mm.
on anything, we're doing a lot of crazy things on this. And one of the interesting facets for this project is, yeah, we are working with a mixed team of people who are very excited and very graciously donating their time and energy to do little bits of features here and there and of different varying levels of responsibility, varying levels of time. We have contract artists, we
Mm.
have all
Mm.
kinds of people we're working with. And so not only are they coming in, they didn't see the whole decision tree. They may have seen some of it. We also
Right.
had been doing like kind of, I'll call it open development. I would stream me designing stuff, building stuff on Twitch a couple times a week. And that was really cool. We had to stop
Right.
just for kind of spoilery reasons.
Sure.
But we're going to start it back up too. And so working, one of the like things this has been for me is talk about like myths about game design. This has been a crash course for me of encountering a lot of people who are not only very dedicated to the franchise and want to make the best thing possible. I mean, we all do, right? But this
Yep.
is their
Mm,
beloved thing that they want, that they get to
mm,
be a part of, and they get to, they're here. I mean, talk about the mentality. They want to just contribute, because they just want to contribute. That is the most passionate, awesome person you're ever going to find.
right.
They're just here because they want to
Mm,
be. So you don't want to like crush them and drag them all the way
mm,
down,
mm, mm,
but it's been the crash course of what people it's hard, I found personally, to communicate this, and I'm still learning, is your piece is a piece of a whole. Just what you're
yes.
saying is
Yeah.
very like resonant for
100%.
me of like this text is going to be displaying in a window this big with a big piece of art here, with some animating thing here, with some other thing here. This whole thing is a piece of a whole. And so convincing, almost like I'm going to use the word convincing people, like an artist who wants to do the best job possible, to not do the best job possible,
Right.
because then they're actually not only killing themselves doing work they don't have to. I hate throwing away work, especially in a
Yeah.
production phase. They're doing work they don't have to, but also they might even be competing with the other parts of what's going to make this cohesive and work together. Like,
100%.
like, one of the things working with the artist, for example, and this is very
Mm,
story minded, is
mm,
the artist would have a very like deep and rich story for why things are the way they are
mm,
when they're painting. And so they'd be asking questions about, well, if they have this backstory in this, that means I should paint this little bit here.
mm.
And there's sometimes when that can work, and sometimes they said, this doesn't need to make sense. We're going to have writing that supports this, and the writing might change its mind because that part is unfinished. We're going to have animation to support this, or the player shouldn't know this. They don't need to learn everything just looking at the picture. They're going to have a long experience with this character where they get to
Right.
ask them questions. And so
Mm,
getting everybody in the mindset, and we want to talk about moving together, looking at the game as a cohesive, coherent whole, even with,
mm.
like you said, yeah, the writing, it could be better. That's fine. But you know what? We got it hooked up. It's attached to a character. It's lip syncing. It's playing VO, whatever else it needs to do. The intended
Yep.
experience. I think I see that with all the new people getting something playable, and like
Mm.
you'll understand, kind of like the old joke about like, oh, I'll know it when I see it,
Yeah. Yeah.
define whatever, define pornography, right? I'll know it when I see it.
Mm, mm.
That's the kind of thing, especially since we've honed our eyes to like look for all the faults, like we were talking about earlier. You put something in and it's like, this is working, that thing over there is not working. It
Right.
could be a UI element. It could be
Yeah.
the size of your text. It could be anything, but you
Yeah.
don't know until you really get it all together. And then you know more about what things need to pull what weight too.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's another thing that we talk about a lot too, which is you don't want to polish everything because like be out in isolation. You don't want everything to be polished in isolation because without the context of the whole, you don't know if it needs it, right? And to your other point, you're taking time away from people who then maybe could contribute, right? If
Yep.
by using that time. So I think that gets back to the sort of what good looks like. So early on, what good looks like involves a lot of individual contributors. As you start to progress in production, it starts to become groups that are, what does good look like for your group? What are you presenting? And then we present that in a larger whole. And then yeah, and it's about doing things, I think, in phases. It's easier said than done though, right? Like so hard. I think it's interesting your comment about people sort of coming in a later stage of the project is sort of a micro or macro version of, when you do hire those folks for, the final production period or something like that. Of course, they all want to contribute their own whatever to it. And meanwhile, we're all thinking we just got to get it done. We know what we're doing. Let's just get it done, right? And so I think one thing traditionally that I've seen I'll say myself and I've seen others do poorly is when you bring those folks in, you got to level set with them. You really got to have an honest conversation. Like, look, you're coming in. This is fantastic. We can't wait to have you, but this is where we're at, right? Like, it feels like, to your point, feels like you're crushing someone's dreams. But I think, that honesty and transparency up front is better because it will help them sort of level set, and kind of go, okay, I can do that. Or maybe they'll just be like, no, that's not what I signed up for. And then they self-select out, right? But
Yeah, that's been our, I think, what we've been learning too.
Yeah.
Of course, easier said than done for almost everything in the world. I
Yeah.
think I've had I just like you, like I've my favorite way to say it, my favorite way to describe it morphs every week. I think
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
last time I said this, I talked to someone about it. I probably said something like, "That's a great idea. Let's use it in the sequel."
Right. Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
like that. Because I want to acknowledge, you know, again, myths of game development is just like, not that, of course it's fun. We're all doing this because it's fun, right? I mean, I think unless you, maybe you have a certain, or I don't know, maybe we all have some personality that's a little like heads not totally screwed on straight. I don't know. You can make all kinds of jokes about artists, but we're them. Um, but there is this element of, this is fun, but you know what? It is also a lot of work, and
Mhm.
the kind of I was calling it a couple weeks ago, magical thinking.
Right.
When I would love doing like focus tests. We did a lot of kids games at Toys for Bob, and focus tests with kids and talking about kids was fascinating because they have built-in magical thinking, right? We're
Right.
just like, oh, it would be so cool if in the game this could happen. And like a
Mhm.
little 6-year-old is telling you about, there's this most inane thing in the world. And like
Right.
that joy is wonderful. And they could sit there playing a game and have a totally different experience than you would ever expect. You want to talk about being surprised? Kids give you everything.
Yeah.
So they already have this magical thinking, and maybe just through like making a lot of games for children, it's built in. But with new developers, there's even a magical thinking around,
Yeah.
oh, we could do that, we could do it, we could that. I'm like, I'm curious because you said you would give talks about this.
Mm.
How, like, I don't want to say how do you crash course someone in that, but what are some of your experiences with, like, have you had experiences with people where you have to like say, hey, this is kind of too magical and too out there. How do you get them, um or have you had experiences where you can get them down to
Mm.
earth, or
Mm.
pair them with
Mm.
people who can help them
Mm.
learn and sort of bring them up to, okay, this is great, but this is too magical. How am
Yeah.
I going to show you the way forward?
Yeah. Good question. I think, if I'm honest, the cases where I've seen that in a way that needs correction of some sort, right, actually falls to the vision holder and not describing the vision clearly enough or consistently enough. Because I mean, I'm not to say that there haven't, I can certainly picture instances where we've had folks who have just continued to draw outside the box that we've created. And it's like, okay, well, this is now a you problem. This isn't an us problem. This is a you problem. But most of the times when I've seen it, it's because they didn't understand. Like the vision wasn't clear. They didn't know what the bounding box was. And so given that, they're like, okay, well, I'm gonna just go out here because I think this is right. And then you have to have that conversation. But really it's on people like me. It's on the people who've set the vision. And so one of the things I've um, tried to work on myself is I guess you call it vision casting, right? But it's in the way you do it so that because to me vision is it's a really challenging thing because you want to create something that inspires, you want to create something that people are excited about and provides enough direction that they can kind of see where they're going and also how their piece of the pie, if even, like if it's a lead, a head of art, they know where the art vision fits within that other vision. But it's so easy to tip it over to the other side where it becomes prescriptive, and now they lose autonomy and they lose the ability to move forward, right? And so, I mean, I wish I had a formula for it. I don't, but it's really just dialing in on I think a lot of it comes back to the consistency thing, which is you can't just say, here's the vision, I've made a great PowerPoint deck, everyone gets it, and then you walk away. It's like we probably have to revisit this every, 3 months or something like that, because there's going to be new people. There's going to be some places where we strayed from that vision and we need to clarify that. Or maybe the vision itself has actually changed, which is, that's a whole other topic. But um, so I think continuing to revisit it and come back to it, I find that because then that gives you, sorry, going all the way back to your original question, that gives you the sort of that bar that you can come back to and say, okay, do you understand the vision? Yep, I think I understand the vision. They paired it back. Okay, good. You understand the vision. Do you see how this is kind of falling outside of the vision? And that's usually the way I like to have that conversation if we're having it, right? And then say, but how could we make it, how we bring it in line with the vision, right? And because it's not about yes or no, then it's about, okay, how are we going to adjust this, and how are we going to take what you've got and maybe figure out a way to make it work? Because a lot of times that's what it is too. It's I I mean, and there's certainly been a couple times where things have just been so off, out in the, cornfield somewhere where they're just not usable at all. But mostly it's like, okay, this just needs work and to bring it in line with what we've got. And then you sort of bring it back in, right? So anyway, that I'm just rambling now, I feel like, but
No, one, it was a high level question,
yeah,
but two, like just what you said, if there was an easy answer, we'd all be millionaires and everyone would be making
yeah,
games or whatever. I
yeah,
mean, it's like the nature of creativity and human relationships and communication. It's
yeah.
always hard.
Yeah.
You
And
know.
now we're in a sort of remote distributed world, and it's suddenly gotten even harder. So
Well,
both
no, I
easier
want to
but
ask
harder.
about that. No, no, I'm really curious because like I have my own experience with it, going from never remote to almost permanently remote
Yeah,
outside of games, and now coming back into games and trying to reintroduce or introduce, depends on who I'm working with, remote as a concept. Like
yeah,
I worked for a company that did 24-hour live broadcasting. Of course, we had remote because we
right.
needed people literally awake at all hours to do
Yeah.
all kinds of things.
Hmm.
And so it's really interesting. They built their whole infrastructure from the ground up for live sports, basically. Gosh, here
Hmm.
comes sports again.
Hmm.
So they were built all the way back to like, I mean, they were an offshoot of the MLB, actually, baseball. And so they were set up. They had processes, protocols, all the way up to the very top of the chain that were all about, well, we need everybody everywhere all at once. And we can't do that because people sleep. So we need a way to do this. And so there was a lot of very interesting structures in place to make that successful. And that company was very, I think, very successful. Now, I still had an office. I would go into the office a lot of the days, but it was very
Hmm.
funny spending the day talking to almost nobody in the office. And
Right.
as I was talking to people in other time zones on this project, partly because we
Hmm.
are scrappy indies and we don't even have a physical office, partly just because like one of the biggest assets of remote work is we can access talent everywhere. And
Yeah.
so like we have people like I don't even I think we have more people outside of North America than inside North
Wow.
America right now, which is
Cool.
cool as far as I'm concerned,
Yeah.
because now we can work with these people who are like totally, we would never be able to access if we said, hey, can you work? You're going to have to relocate to this office. So, of course, that's my lead in to say, like, yeah, I think it's a net win, but I also see some of the challenges. And especially for people who aren't used to it or a company that isn't structured or sort of buying into it. I'm curious, like, for you, like, how did you enter into it? Was it a requirement? Was it sort of top down or was it reactive? Like, oh, we have to do this.
Yeah.
How's your relationship with it?
So I was on Legendary Edition when the initial pandemic COVID hit, and the interesting thing was that project was one where we leaned into co-dev more than we had ever done before on a project. So I don't know how big we got, but I would say the internal team was probably less than a quarter of the size of the full team. About all the developers we had working on the project elsewhere, right? Which is quite a quite a small portion, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it was a conscious choice. But what it meant was we were already in a sense distributed because those folks were not in Edmonton primarily. We had some in California. We had a large group at EA Create in Shanghai, and then we had other small groups throughout Asia and Europe as well. Even Denmark, I believe we had a group. So we were already in this sort of mindset of having to figure some of that out. And when we did the shift, it was definitely one of those, okay, well, we're going, but it was interesting because um, we had seen some of our team in China had actually gone to a sort of work from home state before we did. And so I was like, I think this is going to happen here. And we sort of prepared for it. We got ourselves set. So when it actually happened, it was like March of 2020. We were kind of all set and ready, and we made the adjustment. Um, so that was my initial foray into it. And then, like everyone else in the world, we were like, okay, well, is this a week? Is this a month? And then 2 years later, you're like, oh, okay, this is a thing, right? This is the new normal. But sort of fast forward to starting up Worlds Untold, I was more convinced by that point that working remote and distributed was the way of the future than ever, having experienced it. Now, it's not to say that it is, I think, without its flaws, without its issues. I think we're in a creative industry, and the lack of ability to sort of have quick informal conversations off the cuff, that hurts us. I definitely feel that. I think the other thing I'm keenly aware of, we're building not just a studio, we're building a culture. We're trying to create, like-minded people who want to work together, and they're going to spend the next, 4 or 5 years, doing something really challenging together. The ability to build trust, build empathy amongst each other, it's really hard to do when you're just a face on a screen, right? So we've mitigated that so far with like doing regular sort of team gatherings, and I think that's helping and working towards that. But I think it's your point. So many positives. You can access people from all over the world, right? You don't have those same restrictions. You're not actually like it's funny. Like I'll be curious in maybe 20 years or something like that if it seems archaic to ask someone to move for a job. Do you know what I mean? Like we
Yeah.
used to do that. That was the expectation. It's like, oh yeah, you got a job, you got to move to our city. Really?
Yeah.
I do. I have to move all the way there. And there's a lot of industries and a lot of people that is going to stay the case because they don't have the luxury of working in an industry where you can do this as we have. But for those that do, it's going to feel weird, right? Why? Really? You want me to move? Why? Right?
Yeah. Why do you need my body? I'm here.
Yeah, exactly. So travel is one thing, and meeting the team and stuff like that. So anyway, all that to say, I'm a big fan. I don't think we've all figured it out. I feel like we're kind of all guinea pigs going through this for the first time. Sort of forging ahead and trying our best to figure it out and finding that balance between it's great. We have access to each other very quickly and very seamlessly, but we also are lacking a bit of connection, on the human side. And how do we sort of maintain that an interesting way? And I imagine someday in the future we will probably have an office as the team grows and we get more people. Just by nature, we'll have more people locally than we will distributed. And so having a place for them to land and come in and talk and stuff like that would be great. But it's not going to look like an office that I've ever worked in, right? Because we know as much as people say, yeah, I'd love to come into an office, you're still going to get, a percentage of the people coming in on a percentage of the days to do that. So what does that look like? I don't even know right now. So it's an interesting time. But for the most part, I really enjoy the remote. I think most people enjoy the flexibility it affords where it's like, hey, you know what? I got to take my dog to the vet. I got to do this, right? And it's not a big ordeal. It's like you're home, you can do it. The biggest thing I learned through Legendary Edition is how you got to turn it off, right? It's in your home, so you got to turn it off, and you've got to set up some firm lines around that and encourage everyone else to do it because it's become way too easy to be on 24/7, right? That's the one thing.
Yeah, I agree completely. And so whatever there's stories about return to office and efficiency, I'm like, that is not the problem. It is
No,
exactly what you're raising, which is
no,
our connectedness and use the right word, empathy. That's how I
no,
feel about it too. It's like that's the part that's harder to do, and for some people.
no,
But I actually have a different lighting array in my room and my desk. Well, this is a standing desk. I actually, when I'm done working, I put my desk down because
mm,
this is my living room. That's my bedroom. I
yeah,
can't feel like I never, and frankly, I have, or sorry, not frankly, thankfully, I have evening activities which always take me out of the house. And the
right,
idea of being trapped in my
yeah,
home, which is
yeah,
also my work, which is also my life, all at once, that takes a huge toll on people. And so you have to be very conscious of that. I want to actually ask you a question too, Fred, about this in a sec. But the other thing I noticed too with remote work that I enjoy is there are people who are more comfortable typing at you than talking to you.
mm,
And, maybe
yeah,
I'm just too much. I know I was that way when I was younger. I grew up on MUDs and text games. And it's like, I didn't
mm,
want anybody to see my face. I was uncomfortable in my own skin. And it's like my
right,
ability to write what I thought was a thoughtful message as a teenager or whatever. I'm sure I was horrible. But,
mm,
the
mm,
sense that I could take my time and write made me feel really comfortable and good. I think one of the other risky parts to your point of sort of remote work is not just the always onness, but it's the direct message, you're talking to me now. Even when I worked in office at Toys for Bob, I would always have my headphones on. And there was sort of a protocol where people
yeah,
learned pretty quickly if they come up to my desk and I got my headphones on, they might like wave at me or something. And I'll say 1 sec, because I might be totally in the middle of something,
yeah,
then take the headphones off, then I'd turn and
yeah,
address them, with remote work, nobody knows what you're doing. And I'm not saying I want the panopticon so I can see what's going on, but it's up to us to figure out like, and I frankly, I don't think we figured this out. Can I communicate? Like, yes, please talk to me now, or no, talk to me
Yeah,
later. And we have to learn language like, hey, I'll be with you in a minute, because some people, you don't know what their mental state is. They might be stressing over a problem, trying to debug, thinking something's on fire. And you're just
yeah,
like, I'm focused in a flow state trying to get something done. So
yeah,
finding different ways to communicate that when we just do it naturally, body language would tell the story, the full story. If someone
yeah,
comes up and you're like, yes,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
people communicate that way. So that's the other thing I find challenging, although it is, yes, a boon. One of the biggest challenges I find is nobody knows how you're really feeling when they're
right,
talking to you, which is kind of weird and abstract. And because we
yeah,
have things like Slack or whatever, more instantaneous messaging than email, it's we might have different expectations about like immediacy of response and things like
mm,
that. So that's the
totally,
other kind of tricky. We are still humans and we still have emotions and foibles.
yeah.
So, but Fred, I was curious for you, like, because is this your first time doing remote work too?
Well, besides at the end of
Besides,
Activision,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's my first time. I'm an introvert, so most times I have everything on do not disturb. Like my cell phone is not for other people to get a hold of me.
Right,
It's for me to get a hold of people. Um, so that's just me though.
right, right. Interesting. Yeah, I think it's a really good point that we don't have a clear and easy way to sort of know how someone is feeling when you send that Slack message, when hit them up, in a comment in Confluence or Miro or something like that, right? Because they are going to get it probably instantaneously, potentially, unless they've self managed their own notifications and things like that, which we do encourage people to do. It's like try
Yeah.
to manage your own space and your own time. But I've always envisioned, kind of like the green light, red light sort of thing. I wish there was some remote way of doing that. It's like, hey, I'm open to chat right now. Generally, I just tell people I'm open whenever. That doesn't bother me, but I know it doesn't work for everyone, right? Some people are like, I need to be in the zone for a set period of time, or these distractions are actually just meaning I don't get work done, right? Versus, I think I thrive on a distracted environment for some reason.
I do too. I just talked with someone about this last week, and I think I don't know if it's a
Mm.
survival skill that we've picked up. I'm curious if you have insights in your life. I think I picked it up because of my I live with four parrots. You want to talk about
Right.
chaos?
Mm.
They're very quiet right now, oddly. But it's also my upbringing. It's just like I did not have a peaceful environment ever in my life.
Right.
The most peace I could get is when I could hold the book high enough and maybe
Mm.
maybe drown out the sounds around me, yes. Dark jokes here somewhere.
Yeah.
But it's just like I think it's a survival skill, maybe, and different
Yeah,
people pick it
maybe.
up. I'm curious if you like have insights about that or watching other people work. What I see is harder, like the red light, green light thing is we can encourage people so much to do that, but there's
Mm.
still we are still tribal creatures. We want to do what everyone else is doing. And so if one
Mm.
person is super, super chatty and super, super responsive to things, it's going to make a lot of people feel awkward for not being that person. So
Right.
just like what Fred's like, I'm an introvert. It's like I spend so much time talking to so many introverts who are so capable and they just don't spend a lot of time just expressing their capabilities
Yeah.
and expressing what they could do and be participating. And so I think like I haven't figured it out yet, but finding ways to structure conversations and let those people into the room and not, I'm a natural talker, blah, 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 blah. Not everybody is, and nobody
Yeah.
should feel the need to be. I haven't found the answer, other than at least
Yeah.
providing a myriad. Like it's cool. It sounds like you're doing in-person meetups where you actually get
Yep.
people together. That's really cool. I would love to do that with our team someday. We can't, we can't really
Yeah.
do it right now, or
Yeah.
maybe ever for some people because they do live very far away. But yeah, it seems like you just need a lot of environments so that people can come in and have a good experience at least some of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of it too, though, is and this is more of it's probably an obvious thing to realize over time, but as a leader, as somebody who's managing more and more people, you start to realize, or you start to value perhaps more the individual nature of everyone, right? It's too easy to start thinking of people as, oh, you're that team, or you're this team, or you're that role, right? And we have to realize that everyone, to your point, everyone's an individual. It's going to have a different way of communicating. And I think that was one of the things ultimately that sort of drove me away from a bigger corporate sort of place, was that everything tends to get corporatized, right? And what I mean by that is it's like we got to do the simplest, ubiquitous solution for all, right? And it just doesn't work for all, right? And people get lost in the cracks, and it's not ideal, right? So, and this is not a thing I have an answer for, but I do try to think of each person as individuals. We have like we did some interesting management training, where all of us kind of got to figure out, sort of what your different style was, and then express that. So like, this is how I like to work, right? So it's like, how do you work with me? And in a larger team, we're not going to be able to know all that and track it, but at least it's sort of a first step in that, like sort of understanding that, yeah, this person isn't going to talk up in a meeting like this, but they'll probably hit you up afterwards or be really active in a Slack chat. The other thing that I think is important in today's age and available is that there are so many new communication tools kind of popping up all the time, is not get too entrenched in the ones that are working now, and be open to something else, because you never know when there might be something else that, oh, you know what, this format works really well for these people, and that's okay. We can figure out how to make that work, right? Like, some people are very much Slack oriented. They'll be on Slack a lot. Other people are like, no, I need a in person. I got a huddle, or I got a Teams, see your face. So making sure that you have those different modalities available, and then you're also open to new possibilities that could come out there and improve that, I think are really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is what you just described is one of the fun parts about a not corporate structure, because like
Right.
you said, corporate is one size fits all,
Yep.
you're all the cogs in the machine, and the
Yep.
structure will be here to remind you of it.
Yeah.
There's also obviously a balance for like, okay, how can we support everybody's different modalities of working?
Yeah.
One of the people we work with works best
Mm.
literally when we are on a Zoom call together. And he knows from experience, and it's just how he works too, and it's his personality, that like the best results are going to happen if he's just sitting there doing work while I
Yeah.
talk and give him feedback just live. And that one
Yeah.
hour or whatever, yeah, we do, asynchronous stuff, when we're trying to complete things and carry things
Yeah.
along. But to really make the big progress, it's let's have a talk and let's do that talk. It works for everyone. And just discovering that, I honestly never would have found that if we hadn't found it together. And it was
Yeah.
really cool to find that together. And I
Yeah.
don't know, like, we're creative people. We want to just find something exciting, and seeing something work. I was a project manager before I came back to doing game development. And that's kind of all I want sometimes, is not like, oh, it needs to be the best thing either ever. It's just, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
they're excited and we found something that works. And
Yeah.
so like the sort of thought I have about what you said too is it's pretty inspired by this book called The Beginning of Infinity, which I read last year, and
Mm.
by a person much smarter than me, David Deutsch. But he quoted Karl Popper sometimes, and he was talking specifically about politics or political systems and who should be in charge and things like that. But one of the ideas he brought up is the best thing you can do, or Karl Popper believes, sort of best thing you can do is be able to try something and back away from bad ideas. And he was suggesting this
Mm.
as a method of politics too, is
Mm.
the best political system and the most democratic one isn't one that represents the will of the people. It is the one that can attempt to represent the will of some people and then test it, see how it goes, and be able
Yeah.
to backpedal if
Yeah.
as quickly. And so to the point of like process of what we're talking about, I've been
Mm.
kind
Mm.
of thinking like what you're talking about sort of sounds like that too, which is, well, you got to be open to new things and you got
Yeah.
to try stuff.
Yeah.
And, even like a very recent game development experience when I was at Sledgehammer, they would do this thing that I would never have done myself, but they liked doing it. So I'm like, well, let me try. Where they're engineers, I would join their engineers, and I was sort of a pseudo designer engineer for them. And they would sit just 100% quietly in a Zoom call with cameras probably off, sometimes on, sometimes off, and they wouldn't talk at all. But
Mm.
occasionally, if someone had a question,
Mm.
they would just say something.
Right.
And they
Mm.
had a thought, they would say something, or they were taking a break and watching a funny YouTube video and they would share it. It was
Yep.
like they had tried to literally recreate The Office, sounds
Yep.
and all.
Yep.
And I joined sometimes. It didn't quite work for me and my
Yep.
way of working, but it was really interesting to see them self-organize. The company didn't authorize it. Nobody, they just sort of self-organized and they said, hey, we're this team, we're the gameplay engineering team. We're
Yeah.
going to try it. And people who
Yeah.
joined, people who didn't. Nobody felt like they missed out on anything, which I felt was really cool because if people
Yeah.
didn't join, they knew it was a low stakes meeting,
Right.
right? And I liked that people can have that and they can self-organize.
Yeah.
And it's almost like some of the best things we could do. I think about this too, is like, I don't need to know what's happening. You figure out for you what's going to work. And to your,
Yep.
like what you're saying, like you want to learn about someone and how they're going to work. Maybe it's like we're talking about creatively, let them offer up their thoughts of, oh,
Totally.
this would work really well for me. And
Yeah.
maybe someone else in the room will raise their hand virtually or otherwise.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we're actually trying that. I think in this, I saw it on my calendar this week or next week. We're going to have one of those sort of open meetings where, because we're kind of at that size now where there's enough of us that, you can have these optional meetings and at least, uh, some portion of people will probably show up. But we're going to try that where it's just, yeah, it's just, you're on. If you want to say something, you can say something. If you just want to work in silence, you can work in silence. But that's kind of sense of like there are other people around and we're working together, even if we're not all talking about the same thing or even all talking, period. So it's interesting. It's
Yeah.
interesting. A good experiment.
That's the word I like, experiment. We don't know if it'll work.
Yeah.
That's sort
Mhm.
of, isn't that what's fun about what we're doing? If we knew it
Yes.
would work, we would just do it.
Yes.
But we don't know
Yeah.
what will work.
That's true. That's true.
So I actually like wanted to pivot a little just because you brought up something earlier that was sticking in my mind. You were
Yeah.
talking about how your sort of your favorite movie is not necessarily your favorite
Mm.
movie forever, and those
Right.
things change.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am really curious, like, are there things that have stayed constant, kind of inspirations or wells of something that you
Mm.
draw upon? And then are there things that have changed, especially when you think about like creative output as developer or writing, any of the
Yep.
creative work you've done? Are there things you find yourself just going back to a lot? And are there things that you were attached to and at some point you just like, never mind, I lost it. I'm done with this. I found a better, quote unquote, or the thing that's getting me right now. Like, what's your relationship with the things that have changed and not changed?
Yeah. Great question. So, I mean, are there things that, because of probably my age at the time and things that sort of stuck with me more? Like, I'm a Star Wars kid, so grew up on Star Wars, and that for me, is kind of at my core. But here's a really interesting sort of take, and I'm sure I'll get lots of interesting hate comments on this. So, um, I've been trying to follow the various new films and what's on TV, and it finally culminated in I didn't have Disney at the time, but I was recommended you gotta watch Mandalorian. And you gotta watch Mandalorian. I hated Mandalorian. I couldn't stand it. It was too campy. It was too cheesy. Partly it might have been my writer sensibilities. Like, I was just like, this just feels like it's for kids. Like, it doesn't like, and maybe that's the thing. Like, maybe it's for trying to recreate that feeling that I had as a kid, but now I'm not there anymore, sort of thing, right? And hate may be a strong word, but I didn't finish it. Like, I couldn't finish it, and I didn't persist with it, sort of thing, right? I've since tried Obi-Wan. It's good. Didn't get into it, but Andor came out, and I was hooked. And it's really interesting because when I think about Andor, when I look at it, I've watched it through a couple times now. No spoilers, but um, it's probably the least Star Wars thing out there, right? From a lot of ways, right? If you think about the trappings of what makes um, something Star Wars, I don't think you see a lightsaber in the whole thing, right? I don't think that's a spoiler, but like, you don't see that. I don't think anybody uses the Force or anything like that, and yet they use the IP, the backdrop of what the Star Wars universe is, in such a really interesting way, and tell such a, just at the core, they just said, I think, if I were guessing, they're going to say, we're just going to tell a great story, right? And the story is great, and you're along for the journey. And it's probably one of my favorite Star Wars experiences outside of like the original trilogy. right? And you know, even going back to the original trilogy, I can acknowledge there's campiness in them and there's whatever. It's like, yes, nostalgia is playing a big factor in the lens that I'm wearing when I'm watching those sort of thing. I get that sort of thing. Um, but I think just sort of to sum up what you're talking about, like that sort of evolution of things that stay with you, but then things that change. It's like the IP is still there. They found a way to make it resonate, even though I think I have evolved and I have moved past what probably originally drew me to that, right? Um, and I think it's a really interesting case study of moving. And you know, I think it'd be interesting to see how popular it is. I find that it's very hard to find people who said they've even watched Andor versus say they love it. So I think I'm probably in the minority maybe on this one versus, you know, lots of people have watched Mandalorian and talk all about that. So it's definitely more mainstream, right? So, you know, maybe it's just like, yeah, my tastes have just gotten off in the side.
I liked Andor.
Yeah.
I've watched all three of those series. Yeah, I liked it.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's just trying to do something a little bit different. You know, it's a little bit slower paced too. I think maybe that threw some people off, right? But so yeah, I mean, Star Wars has obviously stuck with me, but my tastes have evolved. But for sure, like one of the things I found fascinating is as a kid, I loved fantasy, right? But then I kind of evolved out of that. Like it's not that I don't love it, but I'm not drawn to it as like I was, and I started to slowly shift towards sci-fi much more. And then even that, I would say, you know, the idea of being a part of this, telling the story of a giant space opera in the Mass Effect universe was like that was a dream come true. But now I'm kind of I'd like to tell a story that's a little bit more grounded, a little bit closer to now, right? And maybe harkens back more to like, you know, sort of Spielberg storytelling where it's like, what if there's aliens, as opposed to yes, there are aliens and you're going to romance them and go on adventures with them, right? Like, so even within that, I am shifting and evolving and changing, and I'm seeing there's a lot of very interesting recent what I would call speculative fiction, like Severance. I don't know if you've seen Severance. Great show. It's clearly sci-fi, but also just in a very unique and interesting way. I love that kind of stuff now. Like it's just because it's a little bit mysterious. It's hinting at these things. What was another good one? OA. The OA was quite good. Yeah, so my tastes are evolving and what I like, and that's not to say I don't love big sci-fi. Like Dune was probably my favorite movie of the last 2 years, right? I just executed so beautifully and wonderfully. Like that epic sci-fi is just yes, loved it. So I mean, elements are still there, but anyway, I don't know if I answered the question, but there's my long answer on my tastes currently and how things have evolved.
You'll be graded afterwards. Well, I mean that is interesting. I mean, I was a Star Wars kid too.
Yeah,
And I have maybe an inverse, well, I'm not much of a show or movie watcher. I have a
right,
very inverse relationship with it, which is yeah, I did actually watch, I think, the first season of Mandalorian, but only because I worked for Disney Plus.
right,
So I was at the company that purchased and worked on Disney Plus, and like that was
ah,
my team. And so you want to
right,
talk about seeing your own work? I would feel like,
yeah,
well, I'd feel kind of silly if I didn't watch Mandalorian because I
right,
helped work on this product.
yeah,
Um, but I didn't watch anything after the first season, and I think I watched some of the newer Star Wars ones. I definitely haven't watched any of the other shows. But I also think what observation is Mandalorian was also the first one out the gate too,
mm,
and you know there was you could say there's too much content. It's very hard. I don't know how anybody finds the time. I can't, but to like
mm,
consume all of the different media out there, and
yeah,
it's very. But I'm also not a natural show watcher. But what you brought up about like, oh, maybe your tastes have changed, and you were sort of leading into it, saying like, you almost preempted a question I wanted to ask about, like, is there a universe that you want to return to? And, you
mm,
know, how would you approach it with your lens? Like, I mean, I could just give a very leading question. This is maybe biased because I loved Jade Empire.
right,
And I feel like, you know, as maybe everybody who loved Jade Empire feels like where's my sequel? I love this game. Why didn't we get to go back? And you know, that's just me being fanboying just briefly. But
mm,
um you know, it doesn't have to be Jedi Empire, but I'm just curious with your lens and the notion that you have changed as a person. Let's say there's a legion of fans out there for Jade Empire, or pick anything, you know, something you've worked on, and they're so excited
mm,
to return to the universe. And for you, what is in that universe? And like you said, is it just tell another great story, use the IP, use the conceits of the IP? I mean, this is obviously a biased question because that's what we're doing right now. We're trying to
Right.
say, hey, there's a lot of people who got to experience the Orcon Masters, but it's been a long time.
Yep.
And so people have changed. Their time has changed. Their tastes in gaming have changed. Their technology has changed. I mean, the odds of someone playing with a controller might be higher now. The odds of someone playing with having children goes up, right? You know, like there's just so many things that are different about the imaginary player. So I'm just curious for you, if you were tasked, you can pick or self-select, or you can take Jade Empire if you want. You know,
Yeah.
if you were going to go back to that world, the same way, you know, you're talking about Star Wars being this world revisited in different lenses, how, you know, what inspires you creatively there? Or are you just ready to move on and, you know, hey, I want to do the, you know, like you're saying, the Spielberg thing?
I want to say
Yeah.
one
Oh,
thing,
jump
Yeah.
in.
which is something that has changed me rather than I have changed, is I wouldn't mind never seeing another superhero movie for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely it's worn a little thin, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree. I agree with that. Yeah. Well, actually, I think the Jade Empire is a good example. Start with that at least, because before I left BioWare, it was one of the things, I wouldn't say I got it all the way to pitch, but was something I was definitely pushing, which was, I think especially after the success of Legendary Edition, right? It's like, what could we do with Jade Empire now? Now, here's the interesting thing. I would say Jade Empire was very much a game envisioned of mythical China through several steps of lens of a Western audience, right? Having now actually been to China, which I got to do, and grown in my experience, my version of the next or my idea of the next version of Jade Empire was like a full reboot, like a reimagining. It's like, how do we make this a little bit more authentic? How could we actually dive into this and do something that's more than just I guess skin deep on sort of some of the lore and things that are there, and really do something cool. And when I say re-envision, it's like, don't even keep it in the same time. Like maybe bring it to the future, bring it to whatever. Like there's a cool mashup we could do there. Like just what could we do with that? And I thought 100% all the things that sort of attracted me to that franchise and that just the world of that sort of mythical China are still there, but they just have a different context on them. It would be nice to sort of approach that from a different perspective. So I think that would be really cool. I'm not going to do that. I'm not Bioware anymore, but maybe somebody will, right? Somebody will pick it up. It gets talked about, I'd say every couple of years, someone brings it up at Bioware. It's like, why aren't we doing that? And then I think going back to what I said at the start is, yeah, I'm a bit too forward thinking, I think, to want to really want to go back and dig into something that I know already exists. I want to go and explore something new because I just think there's so many opportunities to just find. I mean, look at the name of our company, Untold World, right?
Yes.
World's Untold, right? Like there's just this idea that there's so much out there we can discover and write about and do. And I'm not even just talking like sci-fi world. I'm just talking about just, interesting worlds, interesting versions of Earth that are out there that we could write and talk about and do stuff. So I think I'm much more inclined to lean that way. And I am a bit of a um, an idea person. Like to me, creating new IP is like something I wouldn't say I do in my sleep, but the number of times I kind of wake up with a new idea and I'm kind of like, oh man, that'd be a cool world, right? And I sort of jot it down and say, okay, another day, we'll do that for another day. So like it's just who I am. And speaking of maybe it's a survival mechanism or not, but I was an only child, right? So I had to make up all my own friends. I had to make up a lot of things in my world. And it's just something that kind of persists going forward, right? Where I'm just like always thinking, and we didn't talk too much about science and things like that today, but it's one of the things a lot of people ask me, what inspires you? What do you read? What fiction do you read? It's like, usually if I'm inspired, it's actually nonfiction. It's like, I'll read an article about some new discovery. And then my first thought on that is, cool, what if? And then what if on that? And then all of a sudden it's like, now I've got a nugget for a story. I've got something where it's like, that would be a really cool future if all those things start happening. And there's just so many discoveries happening right now in technology and science where it's just like, it's unfathomable. Like, I almost want like a, version of a sort of LLM that can kind of just condense that for me every day. I'm sure there is, right? Where it's just like, just tell me what all the new things are every day, right? Even then, it would probably be overwhelming, even if it was just bullet points. But anyway, yeah. So I think, definitely more leaning towards create something new, create something that hasn't existed before.
Yeah. My advice is follow a bunch of scientists on Twitter and you'll never be bored.
Yes. Yeah.
Or
Right.
whatever. Find
Yeah.
whatever platform you want,
Whatever platform.
Yeah,
Totally.
it's like, cool, I found something out about how protein molecules bind today that
Yeah.
relates to the liver. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah. The
always
last one,
interested.
what was the one this week I saw? They were talking about they're now suspect that the whole relationship between galaxies and black holes is completely not what they thought, and that there's a good chance that black holes could have existed. I think I'm misquoting now, but could have existed, maybe not at the Big Bang, but pretty much earlier than anticipated, which would mean they're not the result of what we thought they were, right? So that starts to beg all these questions. Well, what were all those black holes doing there at the start, right? Like, what was going on, right?
There's your story. You
There
got
you
the
go.
beginning,
I
in the
know,
beginning when there were, how did
right?
they come?
That's right.
Oh, the black holes were actually part of this plan and there was a sentient being. I don't know.
Exactly.
I'm not the story guy. Don't worry.
Right.
Be careful. That's outside of our decision tree right now.
But a black hole takes up, it twists time and space. So the
Yes.
decision tree, can it just fit in there?
That's right.
It sucks in all the leaves.
Right.
Okay, we have a little bit of avian action here. Well, we've kept you for a long time and this is like really fun, but I also do want to respect your time. Like, I'm also curious, yeah, if there's any questions you have for us, and like, it's really inspiring to hear about what you're doing and even just your attitude about, charge ahead into the future and your
Right.
personal relationship with it. But I want to make sure, you get a chance to get in a word edgewise instead of me just yammering all the time asking you stuff.
No, it's been a really fun conversation, and like the sort of deep dive on not even just production, but working with teams is really what felt like we were talking about. How do we inspire? How do we get people on the same page? Because these are, you know, I think a lot of people underestimate how much effort has to go into the
Oh yeah.
sort of making sure everyone is not only inspired but also we're all pulling in the same direction, right? And it's not a job that you get to sort of just do for part of the project. It's the whole thing, right? And it's on top of everything else you're trying to do. Would you, is that a fair statement? Do you agree with that?
100%. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I think even games have, it impacts with remote work too. Like, there's so many ways that I think has become challenging, and even like team sizes are
Yeah.
make things different. Talk about not being able to go back to where we were.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big one. I could even joke there's sort of components of like the leadership and creative vision, but then there's also the pure execution. And I'm grateful for my time as a project manager. It was really fun to be part of a team of, I think we had 15 different, they called me technical project manager, which just meant I had to talk about video decoders and things like that
Right.
with some level of intelligence. But there's this, it's almost like, when I was working in games, I was confused about what producers were doing, especially in the beginning. And especially where in the games we worked on, where the producers were much more like, I don't want to say menial laborers, but that's kind of how they felt. No disrespect. This is just my naive lens as a kid, but that was sort of how our studio worked. And, it's like, okay, well, there's these things happening, and then there's communicators, and like, but I'm not sure what they're doing. I'm very confused, and it wasn't clear to me. And after doing project management and coming back in, I go, oh, they're doing all the things that I didn't have time for. They're doing this very important work that if nobody does is never going to get done. At a minimum, you can
Right.
still have much more. And obviously every studio is structured differently. But I would say my appreciation for, or I guess in Fred's heard me say this a couple times, and I've said it even to the team, which is building alignment is easy, keeping alignment is hard. Has kind of
Yes.
been my observation. You can
Yeah.
do it once, and then, like you said, it is, you want, uh,
Mm.
obviously production's on my mind. We talked about it a bunch today, but
Right.
you can get people going in that direction, but it is a constant effort. And
Mm.
to be frank, a full-time job,
Yeah.
I think it is, at maybe, I don't know, maybe there is a size and environment where it isn't a full-time job. We're getting an air show here, sorry. But you know, it really like I have a lot of respect and appreciation and kind of like learning even that I still get to do about like, wow, everybody's individual, you know,
Yeah.
corporate, yeah, just like we were talking about. Everybody's individual. It is
Yeah.
so cool, but also scary and also a lot of work to like
Mhm.
see how human everyone is.
Yeah.
So I'm not
Yeah.
afraid of LLMs because, you know, I work with humans
Yeah.
and I'm not too worried. You know, I haven't seen
Yeah.
an LLM scare me the way people do.
Yeah. Awesome. Well,
Cool.
yeah, no, it was a great chat. I really enjoyed it today. And
Yeah, it's nice
yeah,
meeting you.
Yeah, it was really
thanks for the
wonderful
invite.
meeting you.
Thanks for being patient while I sort of, things settled. They haven't settled down, but they settled down enough for us to have this time. So
It's, you know, again, one more project manager lesson. Half of my job is just getting everybody in the room and finding a
right,
time that works for a lot of very busy people. So it
right.
was really cool to like make time for this and make space for it. And yeah, we'll share this with you when everything is posted. We don't have a like release date, but probably sometime in the next couple months. And
Awesome.
we'll be in touch and I can stop the recording button in case you want to say any parting words.
Just again, thank you so much. I really appreciated the conversation.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah,
It's really
thank
nice
you.
meeting you.